This video is brought to you by Captivating History. The term Anglo-Saxons has always been a source of confusion. For people who are new to the subject or have just developed an interest in this particular space and time in history, understanding the cultural and linguistic implications of the term can be very daunting. Who were the Saxons? Were they anglicized to earn the name Anglo-Saxons? Who were the Angles, and what are their origins? And how did the two come together? To know the answers to all these questions, one must have a basic understanding of the landscape of Western Europe between ancient times and the Middle Ages. Even before Rome turned into an empire, it had taken over the Mediterranean region. It had its eyes on the three major continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Unfortunately, their plans to effectively penetrate farther into Asia and Africa would be cut short by Germanic tribes in Europe. The Anglo-Saxons emerged from some of these tribes. Rome had gone against them for many years, but once they started making headway into the empire, there was no stopping them. Here are 10 captivating facts about the Anglo-Saxons. Their diverse origins. The Saxons were a Germanic tribe and resided in Old Saxony in modern-day northwestern Germany before and during the early Middle Ages. Over time, the Germanic people like the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes started to come together. The name Anglo-Saxon stuck, maybe because Anglo-Saxons Jutes would have been a mouthful. The Anglo-Saxon period started in 450 when the Saxon rule arrived in Britain and continued until the start of the Norman conquest in 1066. The first common use of the term can be traced back to the 8th century when people started using the name Anglo-Saxons to differentiate between the Saxons in Britain and the Saxons in Old Saxony. The people in Britain, although diverse, started to develop a cultural identity. Therefore, Anglo-Saxon is not an ethnic description but a practical one. It describes a society of integrated tribes that work together to ward off their foes. Saxons came to England as mercenaries. In the 4th century, it became apparent that the Roman Empire had bitten off more than it could chew. They were bearing the brunt of several enemies, and their economy was dwindling due to excessive expenditures of the military and corruption in the political establishment. The empire was on the retreat. Magnus Maximus withdrew troops from Britain in 383. The Picts were a group who lived in present-day northern and eastern Scotland during late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. The Irish in the west and the Saxons from the continental mainland were constantly nagging the Britons. Over the years, the frequency of raids and skirmishes increased. Without the Roman army to rely on, someone had the bright idea to use a band of barbarians to get rid of the others. It was a nice plan, but it did not work out for them. Vortigern, a national dictator of sorts, who may have been Magnus's son-in-law, decided to recruit the Saxons to aid him in warding off the constant danger. After an arrangement in which the Roman Empire permitted the barbarians to settle on the land in exchange for military service, the Saxons holed up in Britain. After settling in, the Saxons grew fond of the land and realized that the Britons were weak and impotent. They complained that there were inconsistencies in the monthly supplies provided by the Britons. A conference was arranged to deal with the Saxons, who pulled out concealed weapons and killed the nobles of Britain. The Anglo-Saxons' rise coincided with the fall of Rome. Rome was not built in a day, and it did not fall in a day. The fall of Rome was a long and drawn-out process. The writing was on the wall for almost a century. The empire was politically unstable, overcommitted to its expansionist ideas, plagued by internal uprisings, and was going through a financial crisis. Meanwhile, outside forces were closing in. The Visigoths had entered the boundaries of the empire, and the Germanic uprisings foretold the region's future. When the Gothic king Elric started moving west, it was already too late. The Germanic tribes had been pressuring the empire for quite some time, but the Saxon migration in Britain was the first major sign of the things to come. Saxons, Angles, Frisians, and Jutes were all either invading or migrating to Britain. After the sack of Rome, things started to fall into place for the invaders. By 441, large parts of Britain were under Saxon rule. They developed English. The Anglo-Saxon society was a mixture of different tribes with different languages and dialects. The Angles, Saxons, and Jutes spoke different varieties of Western Germanic languages. Today, scholars group these as Anglo-Frisian languages. The northern Western Germanic languages consisted of Old Frisian, Old English, and Old Saxon, and their variations and derivatives were called Invanic. When the Anglo-Saxons started moving into Britain, Latin, Celtic, and Common Brittonic witnessed a steady decline. Old English, also known as simply Anglo-Saxon, became popular. Over the years, and certainly through Norman rule, Old English witnessed many changes. The different kingdoms developed four major Old English dialects: Mercian, Northumbrian, Kentish, and West Saxon. West Saxon ended up dominating the literary standard. For an average speaker of modern English, it is almost impossible to understand Old English. After the Norman conquest of England, Old English, under the influence of Old French, transitioned into Middle English. Today, it is the most spoken language globally and the lingua franca in many parts of the world. Beowulf. Talking of language and its impact, how can one leave out the Old English epic Beowulf? Written in the traditional Germanic heroic legend, the epic poem is a huge work consisting of 3,182 lines. Its composition has always been a matter of great interest in academic circles. Nobody knows who the author is, but this mystery has such a beguiling allure that it is one of the most popular epic poems in modern times. It narrates the tale of a Germanic hero called Beowulf in 6th century Scandinavia. Some people believe that Beowulf was transmitted orally through the ages, affecting its literal interpretation. Written mostly in West Saxon dialect, it is a major contribution of Anglo-Saxons to global literature. Often hailed as the first important work of literature in the English language, the long epic has annoyed and terrified literature students worldwide. Joking, Woody Allen once said, "Just don't take any classes where you have to read Beowulf." Another major contribution to the English language came from Venerable Bede, who is also known as the father of English history. His work, Ecclesiastical History of the English People, is a revered work and is still widely studied. St. Augustine and Christian fervor. Speaking of ecclesiastical history of the English people, it would be remiss not to mention St. Augustine of Canterbury. By the time the Roman Empire started witnessing its decline, Christianity was a well-known and highly practiced religion. Some emperors endorsed it. Others took measures to restrict its practitioners. But no one would deny it was a major social force in the later Roman Empire. When the Anglo-Saxons took over the Roman land in Britain, they normalized paganism practices. Since Anglo-Saxons did not rule the entire region, predominantly Christian places were still in the hands of Britons. In 563, the Irish abbot Columba and other missionaries laid the foundations for a monastery on the western coast of Scotland, affecting the spiritual lives of the locals. Over time, the Christian faith penetrated northern Britain, and in 595, Pope Gregory sent Augustine to the Anglo-Saxon lands to preach the message of Christ. He went to Kent and converted the king. With the crown at his side, large-scale conversions started taking place. The monotheistic faith spread in Northumbria as well and started driving polytheistic ideas out of the region. The African scholar who shaped the English Church. The story of Christianity in Anglo-Saxon Britain in the early Middle Ages has another important character, Adrian, a North African scholar who made a notable impact on English theology. According to Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, he was a knowledgeable scholar and was an abbot of a monastery in Naples. In 667, Pope Vitalian offered him the post of Archbishop of Canterbury, which he declined, instead suggesting his friend Theodore for the position. The Pope mandated that Adrian accompany Theodore on his journey, so he did. Upon his arrival, he was appointed the abbot of the monastery of Saints Peter and Paul, a place that was instrumental in the life and work of St. Augustine. At Canterbury, the two built a school of international reputation and imparted their knowledge to many students, including Aldhelm, the abbot of Malmesbury Abbey, Bishop of Sherborne, and a great scholar of Latin poetry who carried his ideas down through the generations. According to Bede, the school attracted a crowd of students into whose minds they daily poured the streams of wholesome knowledge. It was here that Adrian, a humble man of grace and erudition, turned into St. Adrian of Canterbury. The North African scholar had a decisive impact on the Church's future in England through his teachings. The Mercian Supremacy. The Anglo-Saxons had divided the land into 7 kingdoms known as the Heptarchy. This included Kent, Sussex, Essex, Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. Even though the people of these states had, at this point, developed a shared culture and language, they wanted to exist independent of each other's conscious influence. The 7 states were focused on the native Britons for the longest time, so when an Anglo-Saxon king emerged who started going against his kind, the landscape changed a lot. Penda of Mercia was a fierce king who wanted to compete against other Anglo-Saxon kings. He ended up killing some of the other kings and even offered Oswald of Northumbria to a pagan god. The Viking Threat. In the late 8th century, the Viking threat was mounting. By invading and pillaging towns, they garnered a reputation of being barbarians, as invaders often do. Just a couple of centuries prior, Romans used to call Germanic tribes barbarians, and they, in turn, now called the Vikings the same. The raiders destroyed Lindisfarne and continued to attack England. However, they always retreated. In the mid-9th century, their attitude towards the Anglo-Saxons changed dramatically. In 865, the great heathen army, led by Ivar the Boneless, ravaged one city after another with the intent of conquering the Anglo-Saxons and settling the lands. The Anglo-Saxon world almost fell apart. Cue King Alfred. Alfred the Great reigned supreme. The Vikings had forced the Anglo-Saxons into a corner. Their disparate kingdoms were getting picked apart. In the face of annihilation, they had no hope of surviving as separate entities. To put up a fight against the Scandinavian invaders, they had to unify and form a coalition. The youngest son of King Aethelwulf of Wessex, Alfred, took it upon himself to conduct this unification. Alfred's older brothers inherited the throne from Aethelwulf, but failed to keep the great heathen army at bay. By 870, Wessex was the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom, and danger was mounting on it from all sides. Alfred and his brother, King Aethelred, led the defense against the Vikings. After a couple of underwhelming results from the Anglo-Saxons, Alfred earned a decisive victory in the Battle of Ashdown. After Aethelred's death, Alfred became the king. Upon ascending the throne, Alfred, beset against hefty odds, suffered a couple of defeats. All hopes of driving Vikings out by force had been dashed, so he made peace with the invaders and paid them a hefty sum to leave the lands. They left in 871, but part of the army returned in 876, violating the pact and attacking Wessex. Alfred eventually had to flee. A treaty was signed that designated the borders of Alfred's lands and the Vikings, with their land being known as the Danelaw. However, Alfred could not sit still. After some small raids from the Danish, Alfred launched an offensive that saw him take over London in 886. When Alfred took over London, he claimed to be the king of all the Anglo-Saxons. Although Alfred did not unite all of England, he started the process, with his grandson Aethelstan establishing the Kingdom of England in 927. For every crest, there is a trough. The Anglo-Saxon era came to an end in the early 11th century. What had started with violence ended in violence at the Battle of Hastings. The Norman conquest was the hour of doom for the Anglo-Saxons, who never recovered from their proverbial fall. We hope you enjoyed this video on Top 10 Captivating Facts about the Anglo-Saxons. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. The link is in the description.